This is the third lesson, paper 3, Weimar and Nazi Germany. And this lesson is probably one of the key lessons in understanding why there was so much anger towards the German Republic, the Weimar Republic. And what we're going to look at today is the Treaty of Versailles. Okay? We've got to look at the terms, to look at what people wanted to do to punish Germany, and then look at why the Germans were angry at the eventual terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, the first thing you must understand is that the Treaty of Versailles is the punishment that Germany faced for their part in World War I. That's the key thing. Okay? This was seen as a treaty of peace, but if anything, it caused many issues in Germany, and the government straight away, the Weimar Republic, were highly disliked for signing this. So I want you just to imagine that England has defeated Scotland in a war and they started, and that we're going to make them sign a peace treaty. And think about this. Scotland has lots of valuable resources. Scotland has some nice bits of land in other parts of the world. And Scotland has a very large army, navy, and air force. What should we make Scotland do to punish them for starting this war? Let's have a think. Because you're going to fall into one of the three categories, and I think it's important that we understand this. So just write down what you think you should do if this was a scenario, and then we'll start the lesson. Now, the three people in charge of drafting and implementing the Treaty of Versailles were Lloyd George of Britain, Woodrow Wilson of America, and Clemenceau of France. And these three men had very different approaches to how they wanted this treaty to go. So in June 1919, 37 countries met at the Palace of Versailles to decide the fate of Germany. Germany had to attend, but they weren't allowed to speak. And the big three had very different aims. And they drew up and forced Germany to sign the Treaty of Versailles. But what did each man want from the treaty? So you've got Lloyd George here, Woodrow Wilson here, and Clemenceau here. Let's see what they all wanted. And then you're going to do a task for each one. In public, Lloyd George said he wanted to punish the Germans. The British public was very anti-German at the end of the war, and he said he would make Germany pay and squeeze them until the pips squeak. Because he knew there was the British people wanted to hear. So in public, Lloyd George was all about destroying Germany. But in private, he knew that Germany was important. Britain needed Germany because it was an important trading partner. Now, Lloyd George wanted justice, but he didn't want revenge. So he wanted Germany to pay for what they did, but he didn't want it to be an extreme punishment. He said that the peace must not be harsh, and that it would just cause another war if they were too strict. What Lloyd George wanted to do was to reach a halfway point, a compromise between Wilson and Clemenceau. So, that's Lloyd George. Wilson wanted the treaty to be based on his 14 points. Okay? He believed Germany should be punished, but not severely. He wanted a settlement that would not leave Germany feeling resentful. Wilson wanted to set up an international organisation called the League of Nations, which would settle disputes. So you'd argue that Woodrow Wilson's was very fair, didn't want too many problems. Okay. Clemenceau wanted to make sure that Germany were weakened so much that France would never be invaded again. He wanted revenge and to punish the Germans for what they'd done. He wanted to make Germany pay for every bit of damage they caused in northern France by the invading German armies. Clemenceau had three very clear aims. He wanted to get back Alsace-Lorraine. Now, Alsace-Lorraine was an area that Germany had got off France, had basically obtained from France in 1871 during a war. Clemenceau wanted Germany to pay reparations to France for the damage they caused, with 750,000 French homes being destroyed and 23,000 factories. They wanted Germany to fit the bill. France should be allowed to take the Rhineland to stop Germany from ever attacking France again. The Rhineland is on the border of Germany to France. Clemenceau wanted France to take over this to stop Germany from attacking France ever again. So your task for this, I'm going to type it up. First task, summarize what each man wanted in 2 lines. And then, who do you think was the harshest and why? 3, which of the 3 individuals do you agree with the most and why? Just do these 3 tasks, okay? Spend about 10 minutes on them. This will give you a good overview about what each man wanted from the Treaty of Versailles to punish Germany. So pause the video here, and then we can move forward. Now, in this paper, you might come across some sources that might be very important, and it's your job to be able to analyze those sources very quickly. Now, this is a very famous source, and this source basically tells us which way the Treaty of Versailles went. Now, in this picture, you've got a dying woman on a bed. That dying woman is Germany. You've then also got a vampire sucking the life out of Germany. On top of this, you've also got the military equipment discarded by Versailles. Now, based on this source, who do you think this represents? Do you think it represents Lloyd George, Wilson, or Clemenceau? If you said Clemenceau, you would be correct. This painting is actually called Clemenceau the Vampire. And outside the window, you've got 2 bats. Who do you think those bats represent? If you said Lloyd George and Wilson, you would be correct. This is a source that shows how serious the Treaty of Versailles was to Germany. Now, what we are going to do is make sure you understand why Clemenceau ended up basically getting his own way. So, just to put the treaty in numbers, I'm just going to tell you, Germany lost 13% of their land, 12% of their population because it got distributed elsewhere. 48% of Germany's iron industry was lost because of the treaty, 16% of their coal, and 15% was their agricultural production, which was dropped over time. One word to suggest, or one word to describe this treaty was, it was brutal to the Germans. And it was going to put them backwards. It was going to, don't forget, they'd already gone through a war. They'd already faced serious punishments, serious problems because of the First World War. This treaty was the final nail in the coffin. Why? Now, the Treaty of Versailles would be a question that I would describe as a dream in the GCSE. Okay? The way to remember the Treaty of Versailles is one word: land. Why? Germany lost land. They also lost a big percentage of their army. They had to pay lots of money, and they had to accept all of the blame. Now, the type of question you get in the exam is either explain the challenges that Germany faced in the years 1919 to 23. It could be a source question. It could be that section B. Now, the reason why you need to be so on it is very simple. A lot of schools will know this question very well. Okay, so it's about being specific. It's about having enough evidence for each area of land. So I'd say knowing 2 lots of land, 2 facts about the army, 2 facts about the money, and 2 facts about the blame, and being able to explain those would give you a good position going into an exam. So we're going to go through each of the terms, and you must explain why this would have made Germans angry. So we're going to go through each separate part of land. Okay, land, army, money, and blame. I'm going to annotate it as we go, and then I'm not going to type it in. You need to write it as we go. So, 13% of Germany's land was lost. Now, this would make them angry. The loss of land would lead to a loss of population, weakening the country. Remember this: before the war, Germany were a proud and strong country. So this makes them weak. Wouldn't be ideal. Okay. Land also equals money, therefore weakening the country economically, which could lead to job loss, it could lead to rebellion. For the government, this was very problematic. The German port of Danzig were lost to the Allies. Now, losing a port, very important, because ports are important for trade, ports are important to gain food supplies. If it is in the control of the Allies, they are going to be able to control what comes in and what goes out. It's going to place restrictions on Germany as a whole. All of Germany's 11 African colonies were given to the Allied nations. So, as we mentioned at the start, that starter on England and Scotland, Germany had lots of land away from Germany, colonies in Africa that were beneficial. They had lots of money economically, they were going to be very useful. They could also call upon those colonies in times of war. Those 11 colonies were taken from Germany and given to Britain, France, and America. The Saarland was also an area that was taken over by the League of Nations for 15 years. The Saarland was in Germany. It produced a lot of coal. Now, why is that going to make Germans angry? Coal is a really profitable item that could help the country in their economy. Okay, coal is also going to be vital to keep the country going. But all of the profits made from the Saarland were going to go to the League of Nations for 15 years, which means in the eyes of the Germans, the enemy are getting stronger, or Germany getting weaker. Alsace-Lorraine, an area that Germany got off France in 1871, was given back to France. No questions asked. And public votes took place, which allowed people to decide if they wanted to stay a part of Germany or leave. A little bit like Brexit. Upper Silesia voted to become part of Poland. So actual German areas of land could decide who they wanted to be controlled by. This again weakened the population, the economy, and caused big problems for the German government as they are becoming viably very weak. That's land. Okay. Army. Germany's army was limited to 100,000 men. Just remember this bit here. Germany had one of the strongest armies before the war. They were now not allowed any more than 100,000 men. If they did, they'd be punished with invasion. And to be honest, Germany were in such a position that if they were invaded again, it would be very easy to do. The Navy was limited to 6 battleships, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. No submarines were allowed. What's this going to do? Well, it's going to weaken Germany navally. It's also going to make countries such as Britain, who's developing Royal Naval Force, would become a force to be reckoned with. Germany are becoming weaker. The enemy are becoming stronger. This is going to make sure, hopefully, that another war is never going to happen. No air force was allowed. The existing air force was destroyed and all men lost their jobs in the army. That's going to cause a lot of anger. Now remember, when Ebert came to power, he told the army that they weren't going to be changed. But this Versailles Treaty has basically enforced it. And the Rhineland, the border of Germany and France, was demilitarized. Demilitarized means it's not allowed any soldiers on it, the border. It meant that no German army was allowed in, and it meant that there was no possibility of Germany invading France. Why is that going to make Germans angry? Well, if anything, it makes them susceptible to invasion by France. So it puts Germany in a weak position. Money and blame. Now, if you were to get a question like this in the exam, my advice would be do these together. The reason I say do them together is because they link very, very well. Okay, so Germany, I were told to pay 6.6 billion in reparation payments. This was set in 1921. I mean, 6.6 billion straight away. A lot of people think this was too much, and I'm just going to add in the box here. The historians have assessed the amount. They've assessed the war damage. And many historians think that 2.2 billion would have been a fair punishment. By punishing Germany with a 6.6 billion reparation debt meant that Germany were going to be in a bad position for a very long time. Okay? The amount was not set until 1921. Well, don't forget this. This was actually signed in 1919, so Germany did not know how much they were paying. I mean, it's a very naive move, okay? It was basically a blank check that Germany was signing. They were basically saying, yes, we agree with it all, and then the Allies have decided, right, 6.6 billion. The amount of money was seen as a diktat, which means dictated to them. I mean, yes, it was, because Germany had to attend the meeting at the Palace of Versailles, and they couldn't say anything. And if they didn't agree to it, they would be invaded. The treaty also took away 10% of Germany's industry and 15% of its agricultural land. If you're taking away Germany's industry, they are going to find it very difficult to pay this. So you're making Germany's economy close to extinction. Blame. Now, Germany were the fourth country to join the war, and Article 231 said that Germany had to take every aspect of blame for the war, even though it wasn't them that effectively started it. You could also argue that everyone had a part to play, but under this treaty, Germany had to accept every part of the blame. The Germans felt they'd been stabbed in the back by the government because the government had signed this treaty that was known as Volksschluss. No other country was to take the blame for the damage of the First World War. So not only did Germany have to pay for the other damage, they had to pay for their own damage. It was a vicious cycle. So, exam practice. Explain why the Treaty of Versailles made Germans angry. I'd like you to consider this question. 3 paragraphs. Remember, a long P is going to secure those 12 marks. A medium P might. A short P is risky. Don't think that a short P will be enough to get you those 12 marks, just in case you go wrong. Keep a focus on this question. It's not a description of the Treaty of Versailles. It's explaining why it made the Germans angry. And make sure you have a little mini conclusion at the end of each P. Okay? Now, this is a question you will be writing. Just make sure that you have an understanding of 2 or 3 things of lamb, each one. So 2 or 3 for lamb. 2 or 3 for army, 2 or 3 for money, 2 or 3 for blame. And that really does sum up the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, go back through it, have a look, and make sure that you'd be secure knowing 2 or 3 aspects of each of lamb.